Introduction. In the city's bustling kitchens, charm can be deadly, and so can the secrets that hide behind it. Aubrey Brooks is talented, beautiful, and calculated, a chef whose life is a precise game of control. But beneath the graceful exterior lies a darkness inherited and honed, a legacy of betrayal and violence. When Chef Marco D'Angelo enters her world, sparks fly. Passion and attraction flare, but Marco cannot fathom the deadly truth lurking beneath Aubrey's charm. And as bodies begin to disappear, Detective Elijah Baldwin closes in, slowly assembling the chilling profile of a predator who moves unseen. And who hides in plain sight. Chef Brooke is a story of desire, deception, and darkness, a tale where love and obsession collide, and where the blood of one generation shapes the monsters of the next. Chapter 1, The Monster Manila. Dim traffic lights flickered through the basement window. Car horns echoed faintly above. A man slowly opened his eyes, confused, half sober. His wrists were tied behind a wooden chair. He had no idea where he was. Or why. In front of him stood a woman. Beautiful. Piercing, magnetic eyes. Black hair pulled tight, black hoodie, black gloves. In her right hand, a syringe gleamed under the dim light. She chewed her gum slowly, calm as death. "Aubrey," he croaked. "Yes," she replied. "You're not hallucinating. It's really me." "Aubrey." "What? What happened? Why am I tied up here?" Suddenly, realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The basement. Aubrey. Panic surged. Aubrey stepped closer, studying him, a smirk curling her lips. Her eyes darkened, sharp and diabolical. "You know what?" she whispered. "You're just like my dad." The words froze him. Shock. Fear. Helplessness. "You. Just like him," she hissed, voice snapping with anger. The man shook, staring at her, trapped and powerless. Aubrey raised the syringe, her fingers brushing his left wrist. "Do you know what kind of man he was?" she said, her tone almost casual. "A womanizer. Just like you." A sinister smile spread across her face as the needle pierced his vein. She leaned close, gripping his chin, forcing him to meet her gaze. "That's why. You deserve to die." Her laughter was low, chilling. Calmly, she stepped back, crossed her arms, chewing her gum like it was nothing. "Does it hurt?" she asked, voice mocking. Then she shrugged, almost playful. "Of course not. I used anesthesia. So you'll die peacefully." His eyelids grew heavy. Consciousness slipping. Heart pounding. The last moments of life felt painfully stretched. Aubrey watched him fade, a satisfied smirk on her lips. He went still, gone, while still tied to the chair. She crouched, methodical now. With gloved fingers she unbuttoned his chef jacket, peeling it off and folding it with a strange tenderness. The uniform smelled faintly of spices and hot kitchens, a trace of the life he'd had before the basement. She crossed the room to a narrow hidden cabinet built into the wall. Her hands moved with the ease of long practice, a thumb in a seam, a soft click, the door swung open. Inside, rows of chef uniforms hung like trophies, some crisp, some stained, some with name tags stitched into the collars. Each was folded or hung with care, each labeled in a neat, looping hand. Aubrey smiled, almost fond. She draped the new jacket onto an empty hook between two older ones and smoothed the fabric, as if welcoming an old friend. The cabinet was a small museum of her work, a collection that whispered how long she'd been doing this, how many names she'd taken and kept. "Reward," she murmured to the room, closing the cabinet and pushing the false panel back into place. The sound snapped the silence like a seal. She turned to the still body one last time, eyes softening for a breath, then hardening. The basement returned to its dim hush, traffic lights blinking, the city unaware above. Abby chewed her gum, the motion casual, almost bored, and walked out as if leaving a kitchen after service. Chapter 2, Chef Marco D'Angelo. The restaurant, Le Delicieux, gleamed under warm golden lights, every table a stage of opulence. Soft classical music drifted through the air, mingling with the scent of truffle, rosemary, and sizzling lamb. Diners whispered in awe, their eyes following the man weaving between tables, the man whose name had become a brand, Marco D'Angelo. Tall, with thick black hair and fair skin, Marco moved with effortless charm. His confident smile was magnetic, drawing attention without trying. Patrons sensed not just his culinary mastery, but the way he carried himself, a perfect blend of authority and approachability. At a corner table, 3 elegantly dressed women sipped crystal wine glasses, leaning in close, voices soft and dripping with curiosity. "Did you hear about Marco and that actress?" one whispered. "Oh, yes. But really? He's far too charming for his own good," another replied, eyes sparkling. "I heard he's just irresistible." "Poor women can't help themselves," said the third, a sly smile playing on her lips. Marco approached, catching a faint echo of their chatter. He smiled politely, letting them stew in their assumptions. Rumors never bothered him. What the world called scandal, he called distraction. "Did you enjoy the risotto?" he asked, leaning slightly toward the table. His voice was calm, warm, a gentle charm that made every patron feel like they were the only ones in the room. "Oh, Chef Marco," one murmured, eyes alight. "It's divine. Absolutely divine." Marco's smile widened. "Delicieux," he said, savoring the French word, almost teasingly, délicieux. A ripple of delight spread across the table. The dining room buzzed on, plates clinking, murmurs blending with soft laughter. Once the last table had been served, Marco motioned for his staff to gather in the kitchen. The line cooks, sous chefs, and pastry chefs wiped their hands on towels, exchanging curious glances. Marco stood at the center of the kitchen, calm and commanding. "Great service tonight," he began, voice carrying easily over the low hum of post-service activity. "The restaurant is busier than ever, and that's thanks to all of you. But we can do better." He walked among them, eyes sharp, observing, noting. "Some dishes need refinement. Some processes can improve. And I want to expand, bring in new talent. Chefs who are as passionate and committed as we are. Excellence isn't optional. I know we can achieve it together." The staff nodded, inspired by his energy and unwavering confidence. Marco moved through the kitchen, adjusting plating, tasting sauces, offering precise suggestions. Every motion spoke of skill, love for his craft, and an unrelenting pursuit of perfection. Outside, the city thrummed with life. Inside, Le Delicieux shone like a beacon of culinary brilliance. Marco, at the heart of it all, moved through the golden light, charming, brilliant, and blissfully unaware of the events that fate had already begun weaving around him. Chapter 3, Resignation Letter. The clatter of pots and pans had long faded. The last diners had left, leaving the restaurant quiet except for the soft hum of refrigeration units and the occasional clink of dishes being cleared. Abby wiped her hands on her apron, surveying the kitchen with calm precision. Every stove, every counter, every knife was familiar. Tonight, however, she was done. Her resignation letter was simple. No theatrics. Just a name, a date, and a signature. To anyone else, it was mundane. But for Abby, it marked the end of one hunt, and the beginning of another. Abby had always been a chef, just like the men she pursued. She knew the rhythm of a kitchen, the subtle hierarchy of heat and flame, and the way a chef's ego could blind him. She used that knowledge to her advantage. Every womanizer chef she targeted was a shadow of her father, a man who neglected her, left voids that festered into obsession. That was her defense mechanism, her power, and her signature. Her eyes flicked briefly to the corner where she knew her secret waited, the basement. The chef she had killed, his uniform carefully preserved, now hung among the others in her hidden cabinet, a chilling reminder of her precision and control. She didn't kill for pleasure, she killed for mastery, for justice in her own terms. Money had never been her worry. Abby was an heiress, the sole daughter of Leonore Sterling, a woman whose name carried weight and influence even years after her death. Leonore had entrusted her empire to her sister, Marisol Sterling, who had become Abby's guardian. Luxury, security, and power were hers by default. She needed nothing. She wanted only control, over the game she played so flawlessly. Her thoughts drifted briefly to her father. A famous chef with a new family, oblivious to the child he had abandoned. He was the prototype for the monsters she sought. Every target was a reflection of him, handsome, charismatic, reckless with the hearts of women. Her obsession, her power, her monster, was a direct echo of his legacy. Sliding the resignation letter into an envelope, Abby sealed it carefully. Meticulous in life, meticulous in exit. She had plans, and precision required patience. Observation first, seduction second, judgment always last. She paused at the doorway, gloved fingers brushing the edge of the counter. Every movement she made whispered danger, intelligence, and irresistible charm. As she left the restaurant, the city lights glittered above like a stage awaiting her next performance. Abby smiled faintly, her next target already lingered somewhere in the world, unaware that the hunt had begun. Chapter 4, the next target night had fallen over the city, and Abby's modern industrial-style apartment glimmered under soft, muted lights. Stainless steel surfaces reflected the warm glow from pendant lamps, and the low hum of the refrigerator mingled with the static of the TV playing in the background. Abby moved with calm precision, sautéing ingredients in a polished pan. The smell of garlic, olive oil, and fresh herbs filled the air, a perfect balance of order and chaos. Her eyes flicked toward the TV, half watching, half focused on her cooking. Then her attention snapped. A name caught her ear, L'Audelicious. The screen showed a bustling kitchen, Marco D'Angelo moving among his staff with effortless charm. The reporter's voice carried over the broadcast. And Chef Marco still doesn't give a damn about the womanizer allegations circulating around him. His culinary empire continues to grow, and the city can't get enough of him. L'Audelicious is now expanding its team, and Chef Marco is looking for new cooks to join his flagship kitchen. With the restaurant's growing reputation, the demand for talented chefs has never higher. Abby leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Every detail, the thick black hair, the confident posture, the way women glanced at him, was catalogued and filed in her mind. This could be it. Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smirk. Marco wasn't just any target, he was the perfect catch. Ambitious, charming, slightly reckless with women. Exactly the type she hunted. And now, with new cooks being hired, the opportunity was ripe. Her focus was absolute, and it came at a cost. The ingredients in her pan sizzled too long. Smoke began to curl upward, filling the kitchen with a faint, acrid smell. Abby blinked, a sharp exhale escaping her lips as she turned off the stove, letting the ruined meal sit forgotten. Abby's eyes returned to the screen. Observation first, strategy second, execution last. Patience was key. She didn't rush. But tonight, the hunt had begun. Marco D'Angelo was now part of her world, and she intended to step into it carefully, invisibly, and completely in control. The city lights outside glimmered like a stage awaiting her performance. And Abby smiled faintly, knowing that this game, this target, would be her most dangerous, and most rewarding, yet. Chapter 5, First encounter. The hum of the kitchen at L'Audelicious was alive with energy. Orders flew in from the dining room, knives danced across cutting boards, and the sizzling of pans created a rhythm all its own. Marco D'Angelo moved among the stations, taste-testing sauces, adjusting plating, and stopping to ask diners at one table, "Did you enjoy the lobster ravioli?" His smile was effortless, charming, magnetic, the kind that made patrons feel seen, appreciated, and somehow a little in awe. Behind him, Riley Rivers, his right-hand and trusted sous chef, leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Chef. Can I have a moment?" Marco nodded, still glancing at the diners, then followed Riley to the edge of the kitchen where the chatter and clatter softened slightly. Riley's words came slow, deliberate, as if savoring the importance of the moment. "Chef. We have a new hire. She's very skilled, fast, and efficient. Her name is Abby." Time seemed to stretch. The background sounds of the kitchen blurred, fading into a distant hum. Marco's eyes followed the figure approaching. Abby walked in with calm, controlled grace. Her dark hair framed her face, her piercing eyes scanning the room with subtle intelligence. Her smile was faint, a little cunning, magnetic without trying. "Hello, chef," she said, her voice smooth, confident. "I'm Abby. Abby Brooks." Marco's gaze lingered on her longer than usual. There was something different here, something that stirred a quiet awareness deep inside him. She wasn't like the other hires, the other women he'd met, or even the other chefs he'd worked with. There was calmness in her presence, intelligence, and a kind of magnetic allure that made him pause. But Abby's mind was elsewhere. To her, Marco wasn't a person to admire or desire. He was a pattern, another version of the men who had wronged her, charming, reckless, irresistible to others, yet flawed. Another potential victim, another puzzle to study and control. Her pulse didn't quicken with attraction, it remained measured, deliberate. Every glance, every smile, every small gesture was being noted, analyzed. Just another victim, she thought, smirking faintly to herself. The hunt begins. Chapter 6. The hunter. The office was dim, lit only by the cold glow of fluorescent lights and the scattered screens of computer monitors. Detective Elijah Baldwin leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin as he studied the report spread across his desk. Missing persons, police statements, restaurant schedules, and news clippings, a tapestry of chaos only he could make sense of. 3 chefs in 6 weeks. All talented, all young, all gone without a trace, he muttered, voice low but intense. His sharp eyes scanned the profiles again, memorizing every detail, appearance, habits, favorite restaurants, last known whereabouts. The city whispered rumors, accidents, disappearances, bad luck, but Elijah didn't buy it. He had seen patterns before. He had worked enough homicide cases to know chaos when it masquerades as randomness. He tapped a pen against the desk, thinking aloud. Who could pull chefs like this? Someone with skill. Charm. Bold enough to get close, unnoticed. And smart enough to vanish without a trace. A man, most likely. He pulled a new file from the cabinet, flipping through the photos of the latest missing chef. Every detail was another clue, another piece of the puzzle. Baldwin's obsession wasn't just professional, it was personal. He had a reputation in the department as crazy, but he didn't care. He trusted his instincts, and right now, his instincts screamed, this killer is dangerous. Extremely dangerous. On the wall behind him, a whiteboard was scrawled with notes, maps of the city, timelines, and strings connecting names and locations. Photos of the missing chefs were pinned with red markers circling potential patterns. Elijah rubbed his eyes, letting the pieces align in his mind. The killer was meticulous, someone who could walk among others unnoticed, blending into kitchens, restaurants, and high society without leaving a trace. And he could strike again at any moment, he murmured, his voice edged with frustration. Someone clever. Bold. Charming. Someone who knows exactly what they're doing. He rose, moving to the window and staring out at the city lights, as if willing the killer to show himself. The hunt had begun, but this time, the hunter had begun to understand the mind being chased, and Elijah Baldwin didn't intend to let him slip away. Chapter 7. First day in the kitchen. The doors of Le Delicieux swung open to a bustling kitchen, a symphony of sizzling pans, clanging knives, and shouted orders. Abby stepped inside, her posture calm, every movement deliberate. The air was thick with heat, aromas of garlic, butter, and seared meats filling the space, but she didn't flinch. She observed everything, the flow, the hierarchy, the unspoken rules of the kitchen. Riley Rivers, Marco's trusted sous chef, gave her a nod of approval. Follow the rhythm. Watch first, act second. Abby's lips curved into a faint, cunning smile. Observation first. Precision second. Execution. Much later. Marco moved among the stations, correcting a garnish here, tasting a sauce there. Every motion was controlled, elegant, magnetic. Abby's eyes followed him with subtle calculation. To her, he was another pattern, another piece of the puzzle, a man with charm, skill, and arrogance masked by confidence. She noticed the way the kitchen staff responded to him, their respect, their quiet admiration. Every glance he gave, every smile he shared, was being filed away in her mind. Not for desire, Abby didn't feel that, but for strategy. Orders were coming in fast. She moved with fluidity, helping where needed, asking no unnecessary questions, letting her calm presence make her invisible yet effective. A junior cook stumbled with a pan, and Abby stepped in, steadying it with a casual hand. "Careful," she said, voice soft but firm, "the sauce will burn if you rush." The young cook nodded, grateful, and Abby returned to her station, eyes flicking toward Marco. Riley noticed her efficiency and subtle authority, impressed by her ability to blend in yet command respect. Abby allowed herself a faint, private smile. Every movement, every gesture, every reaction is a piece of the game. They think I'm just another new hire. They don't see what I see. During a brief lull in service, Marco approached her station. "Good work, Abby." Smooth and efficient. His tone was casual, but his eyes lingered on her, sharp and attentive. Something about her presence struck him, calm, magnetic, and slightly enigmatic. Abby's lips curved just enough to appear polite, friendly. "Thank you, chef," she replied, her voice measured. Every word, every smile, carefully calibrated. She studied the angle of his stance, the way he held himself, the subtle movements of his hands as he adjusted plating. Perfect. Every detail, observed. Every pattern, stored. A new table order came in, pulling Marco away, but Abby's focus didn't waver. She moved with precision, directing herself with the rhythm of the kitchen, yet in her mind, she was already planning. Her first subtle approach had to be flawless, no hints of suspicion, no mistakes, just perfect timing. He won't see me coming, she thought. Not yet. By the end of the day, Abby had memorized the staff's routines, Marco's gestures, and even the subtle hierarchy of unspoken respect in the kitchen. She knew who to watch, who to ignore, and how to remain invisible while still learning everything she needed. As the last orders left the kitchen and the staff began cleaning up, Abby's mind was already racing ahead. The first move in her game with Marco was forming, precise and patient, waiting for the perfect moment to step into his orbit, and she would strike without warning. Chapter 8, The Hunter Moves. It was late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the city streets. Detective Elijah Baldwin sat in his car outside a popular downtown restaurant, eyes scanning the sidewalk, notebook open on his lap. Every detail mattered, the comings and goings of staff, patrons, delivery drivers, nothing escaped him. 3 chefs had vanished in 6 weeks. Each disappearance bore the mark of someone meticulous, someone who knew the culinary world intimately. Baldwin's instincts screamed that the killer was bold, cunning, and audacious enough to operate right under everyone's noses. He flipped through the latest reports, noting patterns, all victims worked in high-end kitchens. Each had a reputation for charm and talent. Disappearances occurred without any witnesses or CCTV captures. Baldwin tapped his pen against the dashboard. "Who could pull chefs like this?" he muttered, low but intense. "Someone skilled. Smart. Dangerous enough to get close without being noticed." Inside the restaurant, staff moved with precision, oblivious to the detective's presence. Baldwin didn't need to see the killer, he needed to understand them. He reviewed the timeline, visualized the possible methods, and began profiling the mind behind it all. He returned to his office as night fell, white boards full of notes and red markers glaring back at him. Every string, every photo, every pattern aligned in a single mental portrait, someone methodical, calculating, and dangerously charming. And he, or whoever it is, could strike again at any moment, Baldwin whispered, voice edged with obsession. "I need to be ready before they vanish again." The hunt had intensified. Every decision, every lead, every observation mattered. And Baldwin was relentless. Chapter 9, Aubie's private life. Night draped the city in glass and shadow. Aubie's modern industrial apartment glowed softly, steel counters, pendant lights, clean lines, everything in place, everything deliberate. She moved through the kitchen with the ease of someone who turned routine into ritual, a chop, a stir, a pinch. The TV murmured in the background, headlines about missing chefs flicking across the screen, but her hands never stopped. When the sauce simmered, she took the stairs down to the basement, a cool, dim room beneath the apartment where order was absolute. Shelves lined one wall, a narrow cabinet stood against another. She opened the cabinet and the small collection waited, chef jackets folded and hung with a care that felt almost reverent. Name tags, faint stains, the slight scent of oil and spice captured in fabric. Trophies of a private, meticulous work. Aubie lifted a jacket as if handling a relic, tracing the seam with a finger. The face of the man who'd worn it surfaced for a heartbeat and then slipped away, gone from the city's maps and sounds, reduced to a quiet absence. She didn't think of method. She catalogued results, a perfect uniform, a memory folded neatly, another slot filled. That silence, that erasure, was the true reward. She returned upstairs to the small kitchen and realized she'd left a pan too long. A thin thread of smoke curled up, and for a second the aroma of burned garlic cut through the apartment's calm. Aubie laughed softly, extinguished it, and moved on. Precision returned in everything she did, never sloppy, never careless for long. On the TV the scrolling Chiron named the city's latest obsession, Le Delicieux and Marco D'Angelo, handsome, brilliant, the kind of man who drew admiration and rumors in equal measure. Aubie watched him for a long time, not with longing but with a measured assessment. He fit a pattern she knew well, charm, talent, a trail of admirers. Perfect prey. She poured herself a glass of wine, the liquid catching the light like a promise, and let the news run. Her life was tidy, wealth that required no thought, a childhood marked by loss and a father whose absence had shaped the hunt. Leonore Sterling's name still hung in the family ledger, Marisol had kept the business afloat. Money was never an issue. Opportunity was. That, Aubie handled herself. She settled into the quiet, tasting nothing and tasting everything. The jackets in the basement were not trophies in the showy sense, they were proof she could choose, finish, and disappear without the city even noticing. The next one, she thought, leaning back and letting the hum of the refrigerator fill the silence, would be different. Bigger. Riskier. More delicious. Outside, the city pulsed on. Inside, Aubie Brooks arranged the pieces of a game only she understood. She finished her glass, smoothed a wrinkle from the jacket in her hands, and for the first time that night allowed herself a small, pleased smile. The hunt was patient work, and she was very, very patient. Chapter 10, First approach. It was evening, the soft glow of candles reflecting off polished tables as patrons enjoyed their dinner. Abby moved through the space like a shadow, calm and composed, carrying a tray of tasting samples for Marco. Her entrance was casual, yet deliberate. Nothing about her said she wasn't part of the rhythm of the restaurant. Marco noticed her immediately, his eyes flicking from a table he was attending to the new hire who had captured his attention since day one. "Abby?" he asked, his voice casual but curious. She met his gaze, holding it just long enough to convey confidence without arrogance. "Chef," she said smoothly, setting the tray before him. "I thought these might complement tonight's specials. A small tasting, if you'd like." Marco leaned in slightly, inspecting the samples. He felt that familiar spark again, the subtle magnetism, the quiet intelligence in her movements, the calm control she carried like armor. His curiosity was piqued, though he didn't yet understand why. Abby's mind, however, was elsewhere. To her, Marco was just another pattern, another target in the long line of men whose charm masked recklessness. She studied him with clinical precision, the tilt of his head as he tasted, the way his eyes scanned the room, the subtle mannerisms he couldn't hide. Everything is here, she thought. Observation, opportunity, access. Perfect. Your seasoning is impeccable, Marco said, finally breaking the quiet scrutiny. Where did you learn to balance flavors like this? Abby's lips curved faintly. A bit of practice. And a lot of attention, she replied smoothly, letting the words hint at mastery without revealing too much. Marco smiled, intrigued. I can see that. Keep this up, and you'll be invaluable in this kitchen. Her smile deepened just slightly, private, almost imperceptible, a predator's grin hidden beneath professional courtesy. Invaluable, yes. But not for what he thinks, she thought. For the lesson he'll never see coming. As Marco returned to his stations, Abby lingered for a moment, observing, learning, planning. Every gesture, every glance, every subtle reaction was being catalogued, stored. This was her first move in a delicate game, and she intended to play it with absolute precision. The hunt had begun. And for Abby, Marco D'Angelo was no longer just a famous chef in a bustling restaurant, he was her next target. Chapter 11, A Thread to Pull. It was mid-morning, rain dampening the city streets into a flat sheet of gray. Elijah Baldwin walked into the cramped dry-cleaning shop like he owned the place, slow, steady, eyes taking in everything. The bell overhead jingled, the little room smelled of solvent and starch, fluorescent lights buzzing above a counter cluttered with ticket stubs. Detective, the owner said before Elijah spoke, wiping his hands on a rag. He was a small man with tired eyes who ran his business like a ledger, drop off, pick up, repeat. Elijah set a folder of photos on the counter. Do you handle uniforms? Restaurant jackets, chef coats? The man hesitated, then nodded. We do a lot of uniforms. Hotels, hospitals, restaurants. We tag them, clean them, return them. Why? Missing someone's jacket? Several, Elijah said. He flipped through the photos, faces, dates, the same clean lines of professional jackets. These jackets were reported missing. Were any of these brought in here recently? The owner ran a hand over his chin, then shuffled to the back, returning with a stack of old ticket slips. We keep records, he said. He scanned the torn stubs with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent decades handling other people's lives in cloth and thread. There, these were for an account that's new. Dropped off late at night, no name, just a number and a strange tag. He pointed to a small code written in faded ink, S03B. Elijah leaned in. It was minor, a scribble on a slip, but it pulled at something in his brain the way a loose thread pulls at a seam. Any vehicle descriptions? Anyone who drops off after hours? The owner shook his head, then fished in a drawer and found a security log, a digital time stamp and a partial license plate caught by a shaky camera at the alley. The last 3 characters were smudged, but the first 2, CX, were clear. Not much, but enough. Elijah's pen moved across his notebook. CX, late drops, S03B tag. He felt the heat of a lead. Who's the account billed to? No bill, the owner replied. Cash. Same handwriting on the slips. No return address. They call ahead sometimes, but it's always after midnight. Elijah pictured a silhouette slipping into an alley, packages exchanged with the quiet comfort of someone who thinks in schedules. Whoever was laundering these uniforms wanted no trace, no receipts, no names, cash and after-hours pickups. Meticulous. Careful. Bold. He tapped the ticket with the marker number. S03B. Anything special about that tag? The owner shrugged. Could be an internal code. We sometimes tag batches by route, by client, by staff. That one's new. Came in with 3 coats last month. Then again, same code, 2 weeks later. They exchanged numbers. Elijah left with a copy of the time stamps and a photograph of the ticket stub clipped to his file. Outside, the rain had turned to mist. He stood under the awning for a long moment, watching taxis thread puddles, the city anonymous and indifferent. Back at the station, he fed the stub and the partial plate into the system, tracing routes, cross-referencing deliveries and restaurant accounts. Nothing leapt out, just a smear of dots on a map and the feeling that someone had spent too much time thinking about how not to be found. Elijah headed to the dry cleaner's alley camera footage, requesting a high-resolution pull for that week. If the plate could be cleaned up, if the hand could be matched to a pattern of movement, if the tag code S03B meant anything beyond cloth, the map might start to show a path. He dialed his partner. Run the plate CX. See if anything pops. Also pull any cash drop-off at cleaners last month. I want routes, timestamps, anything with late movements in the restaurant districts. On it, the partner replied instantly, the ease of someone used to running the same cold chase. Elijah closed his eyes for a second, the outline of the photos in his folder like stars in a small, dark sky. He'd been right about the pattern. Now it was a matter of patience and small pulls, connect a plate, track a slip, find the person who thought they'd left no trail. Someone who cleaned carefully left one silly thing behind, a numbered tag and the arrogance of thinking, no one would notice. That presumption would be their undoing. Elijah could feel it. The hunt moved forward. Chapter 12, First full shift. It was midday, and Le Delicieux buzzed with controlled chaos. Heat from the stoves, the clang of pans, and the hum of diners filled the room. Abby moved through the kitchen with effortless grace, chopping, stirring, plating, every motion precise, deliberate, as if the rhythm itself obeyed her. Orders came fast, tickets flashing across the pass. Marco's sharp eyes scanned the kitchen, correcting a sauce here, a garnish there. Abby watched him carefully, noting the subtle ways he measured people, the tilt of his head, the quiet word of encouragement, the slight smile reserved only for those who impressed him. Riley Rivers leaned toward Marco during a rare pause. "Chef, she's fast. Really skilled," he whispered. Marco glanced at Abby, and for a moment the kitchen seemed to blur. Her calm, magnetic presence cut through the chaos, and her eyes met his just long enough to make him pause. There was a subtle curve to her smile, a controlled tilt of her head, and in that instant, something unnameable tugged at him. Abby's movements were precise, but there was a softness in the way she lingered on certain gestures, adjusting a plate at just the right angle, brushing past him with a deliberate, almost imperceptible closeness. She watched his reactions quietly, cataloging everything, the brief catch of his breath, the flicker in his eyes, the subtle lean toward her when she moved near. She spoke little, but when she did, it was measured. "This sauce needs just a touch more acidity," she said softly, letting her eyes meet his while her fingers hovered over the pan. Her voice was calm, melodic, and confident, the kind of tone that made him lean in, listen, and notice her above the kitchen din. Marco tasted the dish she had subtly adjusted. His brow furrowed, then relaxed, and a faint smile tugged at his lips. Attention to detail. She noted silently. Good. Smart. Observant. Lunch service roared on. Abi flowed through the chaos, commanding attention without speaking, touching each dish, each ingredient, each order with quiet precision. She moved close enough to brush past him occasionally, just enough contact to leave a hint of presence, nothing obvious, nothing inappropriate, but enough to make him aware of her. When the last plate left the pass, Marco leaned against the counter, wiping his hands, his eyes tracing her movements. You handled that well, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. You've got presence. Abi's lips curved in a subtle, private smile, cunning beneath her professional veneer. Presence, yes. And patience. And influence. Everything is in place. The kitchen hummed around them, oblivious to the tension threading through the air. Marco felt it, though he didn't understand why. Abi Brooks had entered his world, not as a threat yet, but as someone quietly drawing him in. Chapter 13, Collision of Plans. The restaurant had quieted down. Most of the staff had left, only Marco and Abi remained, the kitchen now a hushed space after the chaos of service. The dim light caught the shine of the steel counters, the remnants of midday rush lying in neat disarray. Abi moved closer, her presence deliberate, magnetic. Every glance, every slow step forward was calculated to pull him in. Her fingers brushed lightly against a plate, then hovered near his hands. Her eyes held his, soft but compelling. Marco stiffened slightly, heart skipping a beat. Something about her felt too precise, too perfect, and the air between them crackled. What are you doing? He asked, voice low but steady. There was a flicker of caution in his eyes. He sensed her intent, the seductive rhythm she was weaving, but he wasn't ready to be pulled in blindly. Abi's lips curved in a subtle smile, undeterred. She whispered, voice low, leaning just a fraction closer, letting the faintest hint of perfume drift toward him. Why? Don't you like me? I know you do, Marco. You like girls, right? She breathed, closing the distance. Her lips hovered near his, almost daring him to respond. Marco froze, instincts on alert. He could see her plan, feel the pull, and it unnerved him. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and placed a hand on her cheek, sliding it gently along her jaw. Their eyes met, holding each other's gaze in a charged silence. I'm sorry, he said gently, stepping back slightly. This feels too fast. I'm not a womanizer. I think you got the news wrong. Abi's eyes widened. Shock, disbelief, and frustration twisted her features. The plan, the thrill, it shattered instantly. Without a word, she stormed toward the bathroom. The light inside was harsh and white. Abi stared at herself in the mirror, tracing her jawline, her cheek, the tension in her shoulders. Think. Analyze. Adjust. She whispered under her breath, tugging at her hair. No. 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 This wasn't the plan. She replayed every detail of Marco's reaction, every subtle word, every shift of his expression. He wasn't the man she expected. He wasn't a typical target. He was careful, guarded, serious, yet drawn in despite himself. A soft edge of curiosity, maybe even respect, touched his gaze. Her hands trembled slightly as she tugged at the front of her apron, trying to regain composure. This isn't what I prepared for. She whispered. I've never felt this. Never. She straightened her hair slowly in the mirror, heart thudding, mind spinning. I can't fall. Not him. Not now. Finally, she squared her shoulders, smoothing the apron, and returned to the kitchen. Marco looked up, concern etched in his features. I'm sorry if I hurt you. Or made this awkward. Abby's voice was steady, masking the turmoil inside. It's okay. No worries. She reached down, removing her apron and holding it out to him. A silent resignation. Marco frowned, confusion and concern in his eyes. Why? She shook her head. No. No. This isn't what you think. Marco stepped closer, gently taking her hand and sliding it again to her cheek, tracing softly along her jaw. Their eyes locked, the silence between them thick with unspoken tension. Abby froze, mind spinning. Her lips twitched with a mixture of protest and unexpected warmth. Her inner predator screamed fight it. But she couldn't deny the strange pull she felt. Stop it, she whispered, trying to resist, but a flutter in her chest betrayed her. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit, leaving him standing there, holding the apron she had offered, the weight of it symbolic, a pause between her plan and the reality she hadn't expected. Abby stepped out into the night, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Her mind raced. Marco D'Angelo wasn't the target she thought he would be. He wasn't the kind of man she hunted. And for the first time, Abby Brooks realized the game she had perfected for years might not work on someone like him. She was falling, and she didn't know how to stop it. Chapter 14. The thread of truth. The office was dimly lit, papers and case files stacked haphazardly across the desk. Detective Elijah Baldwin leaned over the board, eyes narrowing as he traced a series of dates and locations with a red marker. Each missing chef, each abandoned apartment or restaurant, each whispered rumor, it all started to form a pattern that chilled him. He pinched the bridge of his nose, muttering to himself. It's too organized to be random. Too precise. Someone is hunting them. And not just any someone. Baldwin's fingers hovered over a photograph pinned to the board, a smiling young man, the latest victim. A chef, mid-30s, meticulous, charming. Something about the way his disappearance fit the others, the subtle hints in the hotel receipts, the abandoned kitchen orders, made Baldwin's stomach tighten. Who could, he whispered aloud. His mind worked in pieces, weaving motives, opportunity, and personality into a single profile. Someone. Dangerous. Meticulous. Charismatic. Charming enough to get close to the victims. Someone the chefs wouldn't suspect. He tapped a pen against the desk. Then a thought struck him, subtle but unsettling. Could it be a woman? Baldwin whispered under his breath, a chill running down his spine. Something in the pattern, the precision, the charm, the way the victims were selected, was starting to form a possibility he hadn't considered before. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the thought. No, it's too dangerous to assume. But. He trailed off, eyes narrowing on the photos again. Whoever this was, they were intelligent, careful, and meticulous enough to manipulate anyone around them. And the possibility that it might be a woman only made it more unnerving. Baldwin leaned back in his chair, staring at the wall covered in evidence. Every connection, every similarity between the victims, every signature left behind, it all screamed methodical planning. And with every second he stared, the sense of urgency built. The next move, the next target. It was only a matter of time before he had to stop the killer before another chef vanished. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the desk, eyes hard and focused. I'll find you. Whoever you are. Outside, the city moved on in oblivion, the kitchen still humming, unaware that the hunter was now being tracked, and the game was shifting. Chapter 15. Echoes. After midnight. The city outside her apartment was quiet, the faint hum of traffic seeping through the windows. Abby sat in her chair, violin resting on her shoulder, bow poised over the strings. She drew it across once, then stopped, letting the note linger in the air. A glass of untouched wine sat on the table beside her, catching the dim light. Her mind kept replaying every moment from the restaurant the previous night, the way Marco had reached for her face, the warmth of his touch, the eye contact that had made her pulse race. She shook her head, muttering under her breath. "No, no, this can't happen. I can't fall for him." Her chest tightened, a fluttering she hadn't felt in years, something dangerous and new, something that wasn't part of the plan. Abby's mind snapped to strategy. Focus. Control. Plan. She mentally went over the next target, reviewing every detail, every opportunity. Marco wasn't in the plan. He wasn't supposed to disrupt the rhythm of her hunt. Yet. She couldn't ignore the pull, the curiosity, the unanticipated feelings that made her question herself. Meanwhile, at Delicious, Marco D'Angelo leaned against the kitchen counter, alone. The restaurant was closed, the last lights dimmed. He replayed Abby's every move in his mind, the calm, magnetic presence, her eyes that seemed to see through him, the way her lips had teased just enough to draw attention but not give herself away. He ran a hand through his thick black hair, sighing. "She's different," he murmured. "There's something about her. I can't explain it." Marco knew he wasn't the type to be distracted by charm or beauty, but Abby stirred something unfamiliar, seriousness, magnetism, danger even, yet he wanted to understand her. Riley Rivers, Marco's trusted sous chef, moved cautiously through the kitchen, eyes searching. "Chef. She's not here. Where is Abby?" His brow furrowed, a mixture of concern and confusion in his tone. Marco straightened, trying to maintain composure. "She resigned," he said evenly, keeping his thoughts guarded. "She decided it's time to move on. Don't worry about it." Riley frowned, clearly unsettled. "Resigned? Just like that? She's really good. It's unusual." Marco offered a small, half-smile. "Sometimes people leave. We adjust. Focus on the team." Yet even as he spoke, his mind lingered on her, the way she had challenged his instincts, unsettled him, and yet intrigued him. Back in her apartment, Abby set the violin aside, running a hand over her jaw where Marco's touch had lingered in her memory. She poured a small sip of wine, swirling it in the glass, and stared out at the city lights. This wasn't supposed to happen. She whispered, a mixture of fear and fascination curling in her chest. Her plan had been disrupted. Her emotions were unfamiliar, untested, and dangerous, but she could feel it forming, quietly, against her control. She sat back, eyes narrowing as she reopened her mental files. "I need to focus. Plan the next step. Adjust." But even as she plotted, the thought of Marco kept slipping in, unbidden, like an unwelcome predator in her mind, forcing her to reckon with something she had never allowed herself before, curiosity. And maybe something more. Chapter 16, Unexpected Apologies. Abby's evening had been quiet until an unexpected knock at her door broke the stillness. Her heart skipped, fingers hovering over the door handle. She peeked through the peephole, and her eyes widened. Marco D'Angelo. Standing there, coat slightly undone, the familiar intensity in his gaze. He looked serious. Determined. There was no play, no charm, just sincerity. Her mind raced. How did he find me? Then it hit her, she had signed her address when she applied to Delicious. Her secret felt momentarily cracked. She took a deep breath, hand trembling slightly as she opened the door just a fraction. Marco's eyes locked with hers immediately. The air between them was electric, charged with everything that had happened before, the near kiss, the teasing, the unspoken curiosity. The sophistication of her apartment, the subtle hints of her wealth. It was noticeable, even a little suspicious, Marco thought, eyes narrowing slightly. But in that moment, none of it mattered, his focus was entirely on her, on the intensity in her gaze, and the tension that hung between them. Abby. "I need to apologize," Marco said softly, his voice low but firm. "I didn't mean to confuse you, to make things awkward." Abby's gaze didn't waver. "I didn't expect you here," she whispered, a mix of shock and intrigue in her tone. He tilted his head slightly, giving a small, understanding smile. "I couldn't let things end like that. Not with us." The air between them tightened. Eye contact held, each second stretching, heavy with unspoken desire and mutual fascination. Abby felt her chest flutter, a pull she hadn't experienced before. Her predator instincts, careful, controlling, calculating, flickered against a new, dangerous softness. Marco stepped a little closer, enough that she could feel his warmth. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let herself linger in the moment, letting the tension draw them together. Every glance, every fraction of movement carried promise and unspoken confession. Her hand on the door, she hesitated, part of her thrilled by the danger, part of her terrified of letting him in emotionally. Marco's eyes softened, reassuring her, yet still intense. The chemistry that had teased them both in the kitchen now surged between them, undeniable. Without a word, they moved closer, their proximity speaking louder than anything else. Every breath, every glance, every subtle touch escalated the tension. Marco gently cupped Abby's face, and she leaned into his hand instinctively. Their eyes locked, a silent conversation passing between them, curiosity, longing, and unspoken trust. Then, slowly, their lips met in a soft, lingering kiss, electric and full of restrained desire. It was more than attraction, it was the collision of two worlds, Abby's control and instincts, Marco's sincerity and warmth. She closed her eyes, letting herself feel for the first time in years, while he held her gently, grounding the moment. The kiss deepened naturally, drawing them closer, their hearts racing in sync. Abby's hands rested on his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath her fingers. For a moment, the world outside, the schemes, the hunts, the secrets, faded into nothing. It was just them, connected, vulnerable, yet safe. When they finally pulled back slightly, their foreheads rested together, breathing mingling, eyes still locked. Abby's walls were trembling, but she didn't pull away. Marco whispered softly, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, Abby allowed herself to feel, not as a hunter, not as a predator, but as someone capable of trust, intimacy, and connection. The night wrapped around them, and in that quiet, suspended moment, something between them shifted forever. Chapter 17, Morning hesitation. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, painting soft stripes across the bedroom. Abby stirred awake, her eyes blinking open to the quiet morning. The sheets were warm beside her, and for a moment, she didn't move, absorbing the unfamiliar calm. Her gaze fell on Marco, sleeping peacefully, facing her side. The sight of him was disarming, his features relaxed, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Abby felt an unfamiliar pull in her chest, a fluttering she wasn't used to. Slowly, almost instinctively, she lifted her hand, hovering over his face. Her fingers trembled slightly, unsure. Could she dare to touch him? A wave of conflicting thoughts swept over her, control, plans, instincts, all fighting against something new, curiosity, attraction, the vulnerability she had long buried. She hesitated, hand frozen inches from his cheek. Then, with a soft exhale, she pulled back, drawing her arm to her side. She shifted silently, careful not to wake him, but her eyes never left his face. For the first time in a long while, Abby allowed herself to linger in the moment, alone with her thoughts and the closeness of someone who had unexpectedly broken through her walls. Chapter 18, Morning tension. Careful not to disturb him further, Abby finally rose from the bed and stepped quietly into the kitchen. The sunlight spilled across the floor, warm and soft. To her surprise, Marco had already gotten up. He leaned against the counter, brewing coffee, the rich aroma filling the room. Every motion was calm, precise, deliberate, grounded in a way that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. He glanced up, catching her gaze, and a small, almost shy smile tugged at his lips. "Coffee?" he offered, holding out a cup. Abby hesitated, her fingers brushing the warm ceramic as she accepted it. Her mind raced, balancing the fluttering emotions with the careful control she had always maintained. Marco wasn't a target. He wasn't another man to manipulate. Yet every glance, every subtle motion, pulled at her carefully constructed walls. She took a slow sip, letting the warmth seep through her hands, but the tension in her chest remained. Her thoughts drifted back to last night, the touch, the kiss, the intensity that had shattered her plan. She had been falling, dangerously, into something she couldn't predict. Marco's gaze lingered on her, steady, curious, grounding. Abby felt herself being pulled in, yet she resisted. Focus. Plan. Adapt. The game was still hers to control, even if her heart refused to obey. Outside, miles away, Baldwin and his team were piecing together connections that hadn't existed before, moving closer to a breakthrough, even if they didn't yet know who the killer truly was. Chapter 19. Behind the kitchen doors. Abby stood outside Le Delicieux, the evening lights reflecting off the polished windows. She had considered staying away, letting the night pass, but the hunt wouldn't let her. With quiet resolve, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. She was back at the restaurant. Moving through the kitchen with fluid grace, apron tied, knife in hand, her mind calculated and observed. Tonight's focus wasn't Marco, he was off limits, a complication she hadn't anticipated. Instead, her attention fell on the new hires, the ambitious sous chefs and eager line cooks. Every glance, every small mistake, every careless movement became pieces of a puzzle she dissected carefully. Abby's calm exterior hid her predatory intent. She smiled faintly as a young cook dropped a knife. A flicker of satisfaction crossed her face, control, precision, dominance. Across town, Baldwin and his team sifted through leads, connecting recent disappearances. Every trace suggested someone skilled, methodical, invisible. Someone intelligent, capable of moving unnoticed through kitchens. Someone like Abby. She moved from station to station, correcting technique, guiding movements, always in control, always calculating. Marco, busy with plating and preparation, noticed the effortless skill in her hands and the subtle authority she wielded. He didn't understand her fully, but there was something magnetic about her presence, a depth he couldn't place, a tension he couldn't read. Tonight, the hunt went on. Abby Brooks, chef, heiress, and predator, moved with purpose, every step a silent promise. The game was far from over. Chapter 20. Calculated moves. The kitchen had quieted after the evening rush, leaving only the soft clatter of dishes and the occasional scrape of a broom. Abby moved with measured precision, scanning the staff with sharp eyes. Marco remained untouchable, he was off limits, but the other chefs were fair game. A young chef, confident yet careless, fumbled with a delicate sauce. Abby approached, her voice calm, guiding him with subtle touches. Her fingers lingered just enough to unnerve him, to assert influence without anyone else noticing. He flushed, grateful yet disoriented. Every micro-reaction was catalogued. Overconfidence. Nervousness. Susceptibility. Perfect. This was her arena, and she thrived here, unseen yet in command. Marco glanced up briefly from his station, busy with plating. He wasn't staring, but he noticed the subtle precision in her movements, the quiet command she exerted over the kitchen. Something about her unnerved him, drawing his attention without him fully understanding why. Riley, cleaning nearby, caught glimpses of her focus and skill, puzzled by how she carried herself. He said nothing, trusting Marco to notice, yet a small unease lingered. Across town, Baldwin's team pieced together evidence of the disappeared victims. Patterns pointed to a skilled, calculated perpetrator, someone moving unnoticed in plain sight, a professional able to evade detection. Someone meticulous. Someone like Abi. Back in the kitchen, Abi stepped back from the young chef, letting him succeed under her careful guidance. Her lips curved in a faint, controlled smirk. Control. Observation. Mastery. Every motion had purpose. The hunt was far from over. Marco remained unaware, Riley puzzled, and the detectives closing in, but Abi Brooks already had the next moves planned. Chapter 21, Suspicion and Shadows. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Le Delicieux, cutting across the polished countertops. The kitchen buzzed with staff preparing for the day, but Abi moved like a ghost through the room, her movements precise and unhurried. Marco watched her from the corner of his eye, noting how she organized, corrected, and guided with an ease that unsettled him. Something about Abi was still a puzzle. Her calm confidence, the quiet authority she wielded, it didn't match the story of a new hire. He had seen skilled chefs before, but none carried themselves with such controlled magnetism. The more he watched, the more he wondered what lay beneath that composed exterior. Abi, meanwhile, maintained her careful mask. Her eyes swept over the kitchen staff, noting weaknesses, patterns, and behaviors, prey for her next move. Marco was deliberately off-limits, a complication she hadn't anticipated. And yet, the thought of him lingered in her mind, distracting her in a way that both irritated and fascinated her. Riley approached cautiously. "Marco. She's asking about extra shifts," he whispered. "It seems like she's keen on handling more responsibility." Marco nodded, his gaze lingering on Abi a moment longer than necessary. "I've noticed." "Let her," he murmured, trying to sound casual. Yet he couldn't shake the uneasy curiosity building in him. Something about her didn't add up. Across town, Detective Baldwin's team reviewed the latest case files. The disappearances followed a chillingly consistent pattern, skillful, calculated, professional. But a small detail caught his eye: every victim had crossed paths with a female chef in some capacity, even if only briefly. It was circumstantial, but it hinted at something Baldwin hadn't considered before. Could it be a woman? He muttered, leaning closer to the maps and reports sprawled across the table. The team exchanged uneasy glances. They had assumed a man, as usual, but the evidence was forcing them to reconsider. Back at the restaurant, Abi finished checking the new recruit stations, her expression calm but her mind spinning. Every observation, every movement, every slight misstep by a chef was a thread she could pull. Yet the unexpected complication, Marco, threatened to undo her careful calculations. He was different. Serious. Not the careless target she had planned for. She paused briefly, allowing herself a quiet internal sigh. For once, the thrill of control was mingled with a more confusing, more human distraction. Her instincts told her to dismiss it, to focus entirely on the hunt, but a subtle warmth lingered in her chest. A feeling she had never allowed herself before. Marco caught her gaze from across the kitchen. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, a spark of recognition passing between them, something unspoken, unmeasured, yet undeniably present. Abi returned to her tasks, outwardly composed, while inside she wrestled with a new, unfamiliar uncertainty. The game continued, but the rules were shifting. Marco was watching. Baldwin was closing in. And Abi Brooks, predator, heiress, and master of control, was now faced with a distraction she hadn't anticipated: her own heart. Chapter 22, Quiet Calculations. Evening settled over Le Delicieux, the kitchen glowing under the warm lights. Abi moved among the chefs like a shadow, her eyes scanning every motion, every slight hesitation. Marco was present, watching, but off-limits. Her rules were clear. Tonight, her focus was the new chef, a young man brimming with ambition yet reckless in his confidence. Abi approached him with calm authority, demonstrating technique with precision. Her fingers brushed his hand briefly, purposeful, testing his reaction. The boy stiffened, flustered, yet eager to please. Abby's lips curved into a faint, controlled smile, the thrill of the hunt simmering beneath her composed exterior. Marco observed from across the kitchen, pretending to focus on plating. He noticed the way Abby commanded attention, the subtle dominance in her movements, and the almost magnetic calm she exuded. He couldn't read her, and it unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Abby felt his gaze, noted it, but it didn't distract her. Every glance from Marco was filed away as a variable, not a complication, at least for now. Her mind was already 3 moves ahead, assessing the young chef's skill, temperament, and weaknesses. Every careless motion, every lapse in concentration became another thread she could pull. She stepped back after correcting his knife grip, letting him fumble toward perfection under her watchful eye. A thrill sparked in her chest, a mix of control, precision, and dominance. This was her domain, her game, and she played it well. Marco's curiosity deepened, though he remained silent. There was something in Abby he couldn't yet measure, a depth he couldn't read. Every subtle movement, every quiet smile, left him more intrigued, more unsettled, and yet more drawn to her. The service wound down, the kitchen quieted, and Abby collected her things with flawless composure. She had observed, measured, and planted the seeds for her next move. Marco's gaze lingered on her as she walked past, her calm confidence leaving questions unspoken. Abby Brooks, heiress, predator, master of control, had not only navigated the night successfully, she had also ensured that the hunt continued, carefully, silently, and with deadly precision. Chapter 23. The next hunt night had fallen over Le Delicieux, and the golden glow of the restaurant spilled onto the cobblestone street outside. Inside, the kitchen hummed with activity, the clatter of pans and sizzling of sauces creating a symphony of controlled chaos. Abby moved through it all with silent precision, her apron tied and knives at the ready, not for show, but for calculation. Tonight, Marco was off limits, her focus was elsewhere. She watched the new hires closely, a young chef with a cocky smile, quick hands, and an air of overconfidence. Perfect. Every gesture, every careless glance, every tiny misstep became a thread in her growing web. Marco, leaning against the counter with a clipboard, noticed her immediately. There was something about the way she moved, effortless, magnetic, unerringly precise. He couldn't take his eyes off her. Meanwhile, across town, Detective Elijah Baldwin was staring at a new clue spread across his desk. A chef's personal belongings had been found near a vacant warehouse, carefully hidden, with no fingerprints except one faint, unexpected trace. The handwriting on a discarded note caught his eye, precise, deliberate, almost elegant. It was unlike anything he'd seen from a typical maniac, it hinted at calculation, control, intelligence. Could it be a woman? Baldwin muttered, leaning closer, squinting at the paper. The team exchanged uneasy glances. The clue didn't confirm anything yet, but it was enough to make him question everything he thought he knew about the case. Back in the kitchen, Abby caught Marco's gaze and allowed a faint, controlled smile. He didn't know, and she intended to keep it that way. Every word she spoke, every correction she offered the staff, every glance was calculated to maintain the illusion of normalcy while the hunt continued around her. Riley leaned in, whispering something about a minor staffing adjustment, but Marco barely heard him. His attention was fixed on Abby. There was depth there, a precision, a quiet dominance he couldn't decipher. She wasn't just another skilled chef, there was a story behind her calm, controlled exterior, and he had a sudden, inexplicable urge to find out what it was. Abby's mind moved faster than anyone else in the room. She mapped, observed, and assessed, all while maintaining the appearance of effortless composure. Marco remained a complication, a distraction she had not anticipated, yet she could not afford to let him interfere. Not tonight. The evening pressed on, the energy in the kitchen rising with each order. Abby's eyes never left her chosen target, her mind spinning scenarios, calculating movements. And Marco? He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Aubrey Brooks than met the eye, and the more he watched, the deeper his curiosity grew. Across town, Baldwin scribbled notes rapidly, piecing together patterns from the latest disappearance. The puzzle was slowly forming, but the picture was far from complete. One thing was certain, whoever this was, they were meticulous, clever, and extremely dangerous. The hunt continued, precise and methodical. The predator and the intrigued observer moved within the same space, their fates quietly entwining, even if neither fully understood it yet. And somewhere in the shadows, Baldwin edged closer to the truth. Chapter 24. Threads of suspicion. The kitchen lights had dimmed, the clatter of plates and the chatter of the last diners fading into a soft hum. Marco leaned against the counter in the private lounge, swirling a glass of rich red wine. He absently skimmed through the evening's invoices and orders when a name caught his eye: Anthony Brooks. A flicker of recognition stirred in him. The name wasn't unfamiliar. He'd heard of Anthony Brooks, a chef with a notorious reputation, talented, charismatic, and reckless with women. Marco didn't know the full story, but the coincidence gnawed him. He glanced toward Aubrey, who moved through the kitchen with flawless precision, her calm confidence drawing his attention even amid the post-service bustle. From the corner of the room, the muted television drew his eyes. A local news anchor spoke in an even tone. Authorities continue investigating the latest disappearance in Manila, the third chef reported missing this month. Officials are urging colleagues to exercise caution as they try to determine any connections between the victims. Marco's stomach tightened. He had seen these reports before, dismissed them as unfortunate coincidences, but now, with the Brooks name hovering in his mind, the timing seemed uncanny. In the main dining area, a pair of diners whispered over empty plates. "Did you hear about the chef's disappearing? It's like someone in the industry is behind it." Marco's gaze drifted to Aubrey. She didn't flinch at the mention of chef's vanishing, nor did she glance at the screen. And yet, the effortless command in her movements, the precision in how she handled the plates, guided the staff, and organized the kitchen, made his unease grow. She was magnetic, composed, undeniably skilled. And now, the thought of Anthony Brooks, her father, lingered in his mind. Could it be? Could there be a connection he wasn't seeing? He shook his head, forcing himself to focus. But every subtle glance at Aubrey, every flicker of her magnetic eyes, made the question unrelenting. Who was she really? Why did she seem untouchable, yet draw his attention like nothing else had? Aubrey, meanwhile, continued her work with deliberate precision, fully aware of his gaze. Every motion was calculated, yet natural. She let him watch, letting the tension simmer without revealing her hand. Marco didn't know that her poised exterior masked a predator, a carefully crafted alibi, or a family legacy of wealth and control. All he saw was a chef unlike any other, skilled, enigmatic, and somehow tied, however indirectly, to the shadowed world of Brooks. The night stretched on, quiet yet heavy with unspoken curiosity. Marco sipped his wine, his mind weaving possibilities, noting every detail of her movements, her interactions, her subtle commands. Meanwhile, Aubrey's eyes flicked briefly to him, a ghost of a smile playing across her lips. The game was far from over, but the rules were shifting. Here, in the dim kitchen light, a silent tension settled over Le Delicieux. Marco was beginning to notice patterns, connections he couldn't yet define, and Aubrey Brooks, heiress, chef, predator, continued her quiet, calculated dance, the predator and the prey unknowingly circling each other. Chapter 25. Secrets unveiled. The next evening, Le Delicieux glimmered under the city lights. Aubrey moved through the kitchen with her usual composed grace, apron tied, knife in hand, directing the staff with effortless authority. Marco, however, was distracted. Something about her had unsettled him all week, and tonight, he couldn't ignore it. Earlier, during a rare quiet moment, Marco had taken out his phone. Curiosity gnawed at him, and for the first time, he searched her, carefully, methodically. He started with Abby Brooks, digging into news articles, social media mentions, anything he could find. Soon, he traced connections to the Sterling family, notable names in real estate, and then, Anthony Brooks, her father, a famous chef known for his charm and scandals. The information hit him like a wave. The woman in front of him, calm and magnetic, wasn't just a new hire. She had wealth, connections, and a complicated family history she kept hidden. A surge of fascination mixed with wariness ran through him. Why would someone with everything to gain hide it and work here, in his kitchen? Now, in the middle of the bustling kitchen, Marco could no longer keep the question to himself. He approached her, careful not to disrupt service, his eyes intense. "Abby. Can I ask you something personal?" Abby glanced at him, her fingers pausing over a plate, wary. "Depends," she replied, her voice cool. "Is it about work or something else?" Marco took a deep breath. "I did some research," he admitted quietly, his gaze steady. "Your last name?" "Brooks." "Sterling." "Your father, Anthony Brooks." "Your mother, Leonore Sterling." "You've been hiding it." Abby froze, a flash of anger crossing her face. You went behind my back," she hissed, the mask slipping just enough to reveal her fury. "You can't just dig into people's lives." Marco started, trying to explain, but she cut him off. "You don't really know me," Abby snapped, her voice sharp and controlled at the same time. She grabbed her apron and stalked out of the kitchen, the sound of her heels echoing through the dining area. The staff froze, unsure what had just happened. Marco remained rooted in place, watching her go, a mix of guilt, fascination, and confusion tightening his chest. Outside, Abby exhaled, the anger mingling with frustration and something she refused to admit, disappointment. This wasn't how she had intended things to unfold. The careful walls she had built were cracking, and Marco had stumbled directly into the cracks. Marco stayed behind, staring at the spot where she had vanished, realizing that for the first time, someone had truly unsettled him. Abby Brooks wasn't just a skilled chef, she was a mystery, a challenge, and perhaps something he didn't yet fully understand. Chapter 26, Crossing the line. The evening had fallen, casting the city in muted golds and shadows. Abby leaned against the counter in her apartment, the tension of the day still coiling in her chest. Marco's earlier confrontation echoed in her mind, but she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. "Marco," she called cautiously. "Can we talk?" His voice was low, sincere, carrying a weight that immediately softened her guard. He stepped inside, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air. I'm sorry, Abby. For digging into your life. I shouldn't have," she cut him off, but her anger had melted into exhaustion and longing. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You can't just find out everything about someone and expect it to be okay." He closed the distance between them, his eyes searching hers. "I know. I shouldn't have. But I needed to understand. You. I don't want secrets between us." Her breath caught. The intensity of his gaze made her forget her careful control for a moment. Slowly, she reached up, touching his hand against her cheek, feeling the warmth and steadiness of him. Marco leaned into her, and for the first time since the confrontation, they closed the gap between them in a soft, lingering kiss. The kiss deepened, urgency rising as all the tension of the day dissolved. Abby's hand slid over him, Marco's hands tracing her curves, the trust and desire flowing between them. They moved to the bedroom, shedding layers of doubt along with clothing, surrendering to the connection that had been building for weeks. Later, in the quiet aftermath, they lay together, breathing in unison, bodies entwined. Marco brushed a strand of hair from her face, his thumb tracing her cheek. "No more secrets," he whispered. "Promise me." Abby froze for a fraction, the weight of her hidden life pressing against her chest. She wanted to say the truth, to confess the darkness she carried, but fear held her back. Afraid to lose him, she whispered instead, "No more secrets," letting the promise pass her lips without revealing the full story. Marco smiled, a gentle curve of lips that reached his eyes. "We'll figure this out together," he said softly. The warmth in his voice, the certainty, made her heart pulse in a way she had never experienced. In her mind, Abby knew the truth. She was a hunter, a predator, and Marco had no idea. But for now, she let herself fall into him, letting the warmth, the desire, and the fragile trust wash over her. She couldn't deny the pull, couldn't resist the man who had broken through her walls. And though the darkness lingered, tonight she allowed herself a brief surrender, a promise forged in intimacy, desire, and the fragile beginnings of something real. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the complex web of secrets, desire, and danger coiled within the apartment walls. Inside, Abby and Marco held each other, a stronger pair than before, unaware that the world outside was quietly closing in. Chapter 27, The Hunt Begins. Detective Elijah Baldwin sat at his cluttered desk, the hum of fluorescent lights above filling the quiet precinct. Case files were spread in front of him, photographs of missing chefs, maps of recent sightings, and profiles of potential suspects. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. Something had been nagging at him for weeks. Then, the breakthrough hit him like a cold gust of wind. He spread out the photographs again, eyes scanning the faces, movements, and connections. Every victim had crossed paths with a skilled female chef, someone calm, precise, and charming enough to evade suspicion. Every detail pointed toward someone who could blend into kitchens, move unnoticed, and leave no trace. Could it really be a woman? He muttered, leaning closer to the board. He studied the profiles carefully, age range, skill set, demeanor. The pieces were coming together with alarming clarity. He pulled up recent applications to restaurants across the city, focusing on the delicious. That's when he noticed it, Abby Brooks. The name fit the profile perfectly, skilled, ambitious, calm under pressure, and with a background that gave her access to the culinary world. He cross-referenced her education, previous employments, and family connections. Everything aligned: intelligence, charm, and opportunity. Baldwin's eyes narrowed as he pinned a photo of her to the board. "This is it," he whispered, almost reverently. This is our killer." The precinct felt suddenly charged, the air thick with urgency. He knew he had to act fast. If Abby was as calculated as the evidence suggested, she wouldn't make mistakes, and the longer they waited, the closer someone else would come to harm. Baldwin called in his team. "We're profiling a female suspect. Skilled, precise, charming, and dangerously intelligent. Every disappearance connects to her, every trace she's left shows control and strategy." He paused, letting the weight of his realization sink in. "We need to anticipate her moves, understand her patterns, and catch her before she strikes again." Meanwhile, across the city, Abby moved through the night with fluid precision. She checked her tools, her next target already forming in her mind. She had no idea that someone was onto her trail, not yet. But Baldwin's realization meant the stakes had shifted. The game she had played so perfectly for so long was about to face its first true adversary, a detective as relentless, focused, and determined as she was. And for the first time, Abby's instincts stirred, not with fear, but with excitement. A new hunt had begun, and this time, the prey might just challenge her like no one ever had before. Chapter 28, The basement. Revelation night had settled over the city, the streets quiet under the glow of streetlights. Abby moved with grace and purpose through her modern industrial-style home. Tonight's target was a coworker, skilled, arrogant, and a perfect reflection of the kind of men she hunted. Her movements were precise, her smile faintly predatory. The wine bottle gleamed under the kitchen lights as she poured glasses. She added a subtle, sleeping agent to his drink, a careful measure, just enough to render him unconscious. "So, what do you like to drink?" Abby's voice was soft, teasing, almost musical. She leaned in, close enough for him to notice the faint scent of her perfume. He chuckled, slightly nervous. Wine works." She smiled, letting the moment stretch, the flicker of candlelight catching in her dark eyes. Once he drank, the effects were immediate. His eyes grew heavy, and within minutes, he slumped in his chair. Abby moved swiftly, checking his pulse, ensuring he was out cold. Tying him securely to the chair in her basement, she ran her fingers along the edge of her tools. In her right hand, the syringe gleamed under the dim light, filled with a clear anesthetic, a final, silent instrument of control. Her eyes narrowed with anticipation as she held it delicately, savoring the precision of her craft. Tonight, she was in complete control. But something was off. The sound of the front door creaking caught her attention. Her head snapped toward the noise. The door hadn't been locked. "Marco," she whispered, heart skipping. Her voice trembled, a rare hint of fear. Downstairs, Marco's footsteps were deliberate but fast. A sudden intuition gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't shake. He had to check on Abby. He froze at the top of the basement stairs. His eyes widened in horror at the scene before him, Abby, poised above a man tied to a chair, syringe in hand, calm and methodical, preparing to execute him. Abby's eyes met his, and for a moment, the world stilled. "Marco," she said, voice pleading. "This isn't what it looks like. Please." But Marco didn't move closer. Shock and disbelief anchored him in place. His mind raced, terror and confusion warring against the bond he had felt with her. Without another word, he turned and ran, fast, desperate, the image seared into his mind. Abby's heart pounded. She wanted to explain, to stop him, but he was gone. Her carefully constructed world had shattered in seconds. She stared at the unconscious man, the ropes, the syringe in her hand, and then at the space where Marco had been. "Marco," she whispered, voice breaking, as the weight of the consequences pressed down on her. And then, for the first time, Abby realized what she had always feared might happen. Marco had seen the truth. All the careful masks, the planning, the games, it was suddenly exposed. A flicker of panic ran through her chest. What if he never looked at me the same way again? What if losing him, after everything, was the price of this moment? Time stretched, every second heavy, every breath taut. Abby's hand trembled slightly around the syringe, a subtle crack in her otherwise unshakable control. The thrill of the hunt collided with the fear of losing Marco, a tension she hadn't felt before. The game had changed in an instant. Chapter 29, Revelation and Guilt. Marco slumped into his leather couch, the weight of the evening pressing down on him. His hands shook, cold sweat forming at his temples. He replayed every moment from Abby's house, the syringe, the tied chef, the look in her eyes. He had loved her. He still did. But now, the horrifying truth burned in his mind, Abby Brooks, the woman he had trusted, the woman he had fallen for. She was a serial killer. The TV flickered on almost by instinct, the evening news playing softly. The anchor's voice carried into the quiet apartment, but Marco's focus was elsewhere. A segment appeared. Detective Elijah Baldwin stood against a backdrop of police files and maps. "We are profiling a very dangerous, calculated individual. Skilled in kitchens, meticulous in execution, and able to blend seamlessly into everyday life. Our investigation suggests someone intelligent, methodical, and charming. Someone who knows exactly how to manipulate their prey." Marco's jaw tightened. He couldn't look away. Every description, every phrase, it fit Abby Brooks perfectly. The detective's words were precise, almost surgical. He pressed his forehead into his hands, his body trembling. Hot tears streamed down his face, stinging his eyes. "She's brilliant, and yes, terrifying, but she's still the woman I love. The thought twisted in his chest, tearing him apart. He sobbed quietly, unable to stop the agony that came from knowing the woman he adored could take lives. Marco could no longer deny the truth. With a shaking hand, he picked up his phone and dialed Baldwin's number. "Detective Baldwin?" His voice cracked, thick with emotion. "It's Marco D'Angelo. I think I know who your suspect is." On the other end, Baldwin's tone sharpened instantly. "Go on." Marco swallowed hard, fighting the grief threatening to consume him. It's Abby Brooks. She's the one. I saw everything tonight." He paused, letting the tears roll freely now. I don't want to. I love her, but I have to do the right thing." Silence followed on the line, heavy with tension. Marco's eyes flicked back to the TV, where Baldwin's profile continued. The detective's voice was calm, professional, but to Marco, it felt like the echo of inevitable consequences. Marco's chest heaved as he sobbed quietly, his mind torn between love and duty. Every fiber of his being wanted to run back to her, to hold her, to protect her. Yet he knew that turning her in was the only way to prevent more innocent lives from being destroyed. The room felt colder, emptier, the weight of the truth pressing down. Marco pressed the phone closer to his ear, tears still streaming, waiting for Baldwin's response, knowing this was the moment that would change everything. Chapter 30, Shattered Masks. Abby's apartment was eerily quiet after Marco's departure. The man she had been planning for, manipulating, and controlling now felt like a stranger who had seen right through her. The syringe still glinted in her hand, the ropes and unconscious chef a testament to her meticulous world, but none of it mattered anymore. Her chest heaved, rapid breaths betraying the panic she had buried so deeply. She sank to the floor beside the bound man, staring at him without really seeing. Marco had witnessed everything, the precision, the control, the predator she had always been. For the first time in her life, fear clawed at her with full force. It wasn't about being caught by the law, she had anticipated that. It was him. Marco. She had never loved anyone before. Never needed anyone. Never feared losing anyone. Yet now, the thought that he might never look at her the same way, that he might leave, consumed her entirely. "Marco," she whispered, voice breaking. The sound of her own name from his perspective felt hollow, a cruel reminder of what she could no longer hide. Her fingers trembled around the syringe, and she set it down, letting it roll slightly across the floor. She ran her hands through her hair, gripping it as though she could anchor herself to the remnants of control that had always defined her. But control had slipped through her fingers in an instant. Her thoughts raced, plans, alibis, excuses, but they all collided with one undeniable truth: Marco had seen her for what she truly was. And she was terrified. Terrified of losing him, terrified of the consequences, and terrified of what her own heart might betray next. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a plan began to form, but it was not for hunting, not for executing. It was a desperate attempt to salvage what remained of the one connection that mattered more than power, more than control, more than the thrill of the hunt. She took a shaky breath, forcing herself to rise from the floor. The unconscious chef remained tied, forgotten for a moment, as she moved to the window and stared into the city night. Outside, life went on, unaware, unsuspecting, safe for now. Inside, Abby Brooks, heiress, predator, master of control, was human, broken, and utterly exposed for the first time in her life. Chapter 31, The Confrontation. The police car lights flashed across the quiet street, red and blue reflecting off Abby's modern industrial-style home. Marco's hands trembled on the steering wheel. He had given Detective Baldwin her address, his mind a whirlwind of guilt, fear, and heartbreak. He didn't want this, but he couldn't allow anyone else to be harmed. The front door had been left unlocked in his rush earlier. Baldwin and his team moved in swiftly, tactical and precise. Marco followed silently, each step heavier than the last. Every creak of the floorboards echoed in his chest, mixing with the memory of what he had seen in the basement. Inside, Abby crouched on the cold concrete floor of her basement, hands clenched, the tied and unconscious man a distant thought. The dim overhead light cast long shadows across her face. The faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air. She could hear footsteps, Marco's first, then the officers' voices, and panic twisted her gut. Her eyes locked on the basement doorway as Marco appeared. His face was pale, eyes wide, and filled with a storm of emotions, shock, pain, love, and regret. "Marco," she whispered, disbelief and fury entwined in her voice. "What? What are you doing here?" He stepped closer, slowly, deliberately, his gaze never leaving hers. "Abby. I'm sorry," he said, voice breaking, trembling with raw emotion. Tears welled and spilled over, streaking his cheeks. "I didn't want this to happen. I didn't want to see you like this. But I couldn't let it continue." Abby's hands shook, her fury igniting. "Sorry. You betrayed me. You brought them here." Her voice was sharp, cutting, laced with disbelief and rage. The syringe on the floor glinted under the harsh light, a silent reminder of everything she had built, and everything Marco had shattered. Marco took a cautious step closer, his hands slightly raised in surrender, his eyes pleading. "I had to, Abby. I love you. I still do. But I can't let anyone else get hurt. I can't stand by and watch it happen. I'm sorry." Her chest heaved, anger and heartbreak colliding in her. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to flee, but the truth in his eyes, the sincerity, cut through the fury for a fleeting second. Shock held her frozen. The woman she had been, the predator, the master of control, felt exposed, cornered, vulnerable. Baldwin's voice rang out from above, authoritative and unwavering, "Abby Brooks, you are under arrest." The officers moved in, securing the unconscious man and carefully handcuffing Abby. Every motion was deliberate, but Abby's mind raced, calculating, observing. She glanced at Marco one last time, and their eyes met, hers blazing with betrayal, his glistening with tears and remorse. I'm sorry," Marco whispered again, his voice breaking, his body trembling as the handcuffs clicked into place. I didn't want it to come to this." Abby's jaw tightened. She wanted to shout, to curse, to make him feel her anger. "You don't really know me," she hissed, voice raw with disbelief and betrayal. "You think you do, but you don't." Marco's shoulders slumped, tears streaming freely. He wanted to reach out, to hold her, to protect her even now, but duty and reality held him back. His chest heaved with grief and love, the weight unbearable. As the officers led Abby out, her mind was a whirlwind, shock, fury, heartbreak, but also a strange clarity. She had been seen, truly seen, by the one person she hadn't wanted to lose. And that truth, bitter and painful, would linger in both of their hearts forever. Marco remained at the bottom of the basement stairs, watching her go, his hands trembling, his heart fractured. He had loved her, he still did, but the cost had been immeasurable. The predator he had fallen for was gone, revealed to the world, and yet, somehow, still the woman he could never forget. Chapter 32, Interrogation and calculated calm. The fluorescent lights of the precinct were harsh, glaring, and unrelenting. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and fear. Abby Brooks sat in the steel chair, her hands cuffed on the table, her dark eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, every officer in the room. She was calm, too calm, but there was a subtle tension in her posture, the faint tremor of anticipation that came when a plan might go awry. Detective Elijah Baldwin leaned back in his chair across from her, fingers steepled, eyes sharp and calculating. He had built a profile, traced patterns, and now, face to face, he was measuring the predator against his own deductions. "You're smarter than most," Baldwin said finally, his voice low, deliberate. Careful, methodical, charming. The way you operate. It's precise, controlled. But you made one mistake. His gaze locked with hers. You were seen. Abby's lips curved faintly, a predator's smile barely contained. Was I? She asked, voice smooth, teasing. She tilted her head, letting the question hang in the air, the tension thick and electric. Baldwin's jaw tightened. Don't play games with me. You think you're untouchable, but the pattern doesn't lie. All those chefs. All those disappearances. It points to you. She leaned slightly forward, elbows on the table, eyes never leaving his. All those chefs, she echoed, almost contemplatively. And yet, here I am. Sitting in front of you. So, you think you know me, detective? That you figured it all out? He slammed a file onto the table. Photos, evidence, records, each piece connecting her to the crimes. I don't just think I know you. I do. And the more I see, the more dangerous you become if you're out there. You can charm, manipulate, seduce, but we have you now. Abby's fingers twitched slightly, a barely noticeable sign of frustration, or perhaps amusement. Charm and seduce, she murmured. Funny words. So, detective. What happens now? You lock me up. Throw away the key. Or. Do you try to understand me? Baldwin leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Understanding doesn't excuse murder. You killed people, Abby. Skilled, careful, innocent, or at least people who trusted you. And you thought no one would notice. But I notice. And now you're going to pay for it. Her calm mask faltered for a heartbeat, just enough for a flicker of vulnerability to show. The predator within her flinched, not at the threat, but at the inevitability of exposure. Yet the next moment, she composed herself, letting the icy, calculating exterior return. You think you know my story, detective, she whispered, voice low, almost playful. But you don't. You never will. You can catch me, restrain me, strip away my freedom. But you will never truly understand me. Baldwin's eyes burned into hers, unyielding. Maybe. But right now, that's enough. Enough to make sure no one else becomes your next victim. Abby leaned back slightly, hands cuffed but mind racing. Every move she had planned, every step calculated, now felt boxed in. The thrill of control had been stripped away, replaced with the cold reality of consequence. And yet, even in this moment, there was a part of her still observing, analyzing, the predator never fully gone. The tension between them hung thick, almost tangible. She had been caught, exposed, yet she radiated a calm defiance that both infuriated and fascinated Baldwin. The game was over. For now. But Abby Brooks would always be Abby Brooks, smart, calculating, and impossible to truly contain. Chapter 33, Love and Betrayal. The precinct was quiet, the low hum of fluorescent lights filling the space. Abby sat behind the glass partition, hands cuffed, her posture tense and rigid. The predator's calm she usually wore was gone, replaced by something raw, vulnerable, and burning with anger. The door opened, and Marco stepped inside. His eyes immediately found hers, searching, pleading. His hands trembled at his sides, and his voice cracked as he spoke. Abby. Please. Don't resent me. I love you, he said, every word weighed down with guilt and heartbreak. Abby's eyes narrowed, her gaze sharp and unyielding. The anger and hurt radiated off her like heat. Love? Love? She spat, voice sharp and trembling. I trusted you. I didn't kill you. I trusted you. Her words cut through the sterile air, each one a knife of betrayal. Her chest heaved as tears threatened to spill, but she fought to maintain her fierce composure. Her dark eyes bore into Marco's, searing him with the intensity of her fury. You betrayed me. While I killed for you, she shouted, the restraint cracking completely. Tears ran freely now, her face contorted with the raw pain of shock, disbelief, and anger. Her gaze shifted to the side, eyes blazing, refusing to let him see the full depth of her devastation. Marco stepped closer, but she recoiled, her voice rising to a scream that echoed through the precinct. Go away from me. I said, leave me alone. His own tears fell, silently streaming down his face. He could do nothing but watch, ache in his chest, respect her boundaries, and the anger she felt at his betrayal. Slowly, he turned, shoulders heavy with guilt, and left the room. Abby slumped slightly in her chair once he was gone, her fists clenched on the table. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as she fought to contain her emotions. The betrayal, the heartbreak, and the fury burned in her eyes. Alone now, she let the tears fall freely, mingling with the fire of her anger. The room was silent again, but the air was thick with the lingering tension of love shattered and trust broken. Abby's world, already fractured by her secrets and her crimes, now carried an ache she hadn't anticipated, an ache that was both familiar and terrifying. Chapter 34, Father and Daughter. The precinct smelled of antiseptic and tension, a stark stage for a terrible reckoning. The door opened again, and Anthony Brooks stepped inside, older, gaunt, eyes rimmed with disbelief. He stared at the daughter he barely recognized, like a man seeing a stranger in his own reflection. Abby. His voice cracked. God, I never imagined, my daughter. This isn't you. She didn't flinch. Fury sharpened her features, and her voice cut through the room like glass. You're damn right it's me. This is what you made me. Her words were accusation and verdict all at once. Anthony's shoulders sagged. He made a small, pleading step forward. No, Abby. You have to listen, you abandoned me, she snapped, the memory of emptiness surfacing in a rush. Images, an empty doorway, a small hand reaching for a shadow that never came, nights with only silence for company, flared behind her eyes. Mom died, and you weren't there. You left me alone. You let her die, left me with nothing. A pained expression crossed Anthony's face. He swallowed, voice thin. She took you away from me, Abby. She was furious with me, my mistakes. She thought she was protecting you from me. Abby's laugh was short, bitter. Protect me? By taking me from you? By leaving me to rot? You call that protection? Her fists curled. You made me do this. You turned me into a monster, just like you. Anthony reached for her name again, hoarse. I'm sorry. I failed you. I tried. You think an apology changes anything? She stepped closer until the partition between anger and grief blurred. Her eyes were feral. In my mind I already killed you, that's why I kill people like you. I learned what you were from you, and I learned how to punish it. The words fell like stones, the room sucked in breath. Anthony recoiled as if struck. Abby, no. That's not, she cut him off, spitting the truth he'd avoided for years. You left me. You chose yourself over your family. You slept around, lied, broke promises. I learned to survive on the scraps you left me. So yeah, when I look at men like you, I don't see victims or lovers. I see the cause. I see the shape of my rage. No, Anthony said, voice ragged. No, Abby. You made choices. You turned yourself into this. I did wrong, terribly wrong, but you chose this path. Her eyes flared, wet with an anger that blurred into something like pain. You say I chose. You say I did this. But you built the house, then walked out while I learned to live in it. You taught me how to use men. You taught me their appetites. I only learned how to finish what you started. Anthony's shoulders crumpled. For a long beat he looked like the man accused, broken, ashamed. "I'm sorry," he whispered, not a plea but the small confession of a man exposed. "I'm so sorry, Abby." She turned her face away, the fight inside turning inward. "Don't lecture me. Don't try to fix this with your apologies. You lost me a long time ago." Anthony hesitated at the cell's edge, the distance between them suddenly vast and final. "I'm sorry," he said again, barely audible, then retreated, leaving his regret behind like a wound that would never close. Abby sank back onto the bench, hands clenched, breath ragged. The precinct hummed around her, indifferent. The flashback images faded, replaced by a cold clarity. She had been shaped by absence and betrayal, and now she would live with the choice she had made, one that no apology could unmake. Chapter 35, The Courtroom Verdict. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffle of papers and the occasional cough. Abby Brooks sat composed in the defendant's chair, dark eyes scanning the room with measured calm. Yet behind that mask, her mind raced, strategies, possibilities, regrets, and the tiniest flicker of fear for what was coming. Marco sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly, knuckles white. His eyes, red and tired from sleepless nights, stayed fixed on her. He had seen her in ways no one else had, her brilliance, her darkness, her vulnerabilities. And yet today, those glimpses of intimacy and love clashed with the horrors he had witnessed. The judge's gavel struck. "All rise." Everyone stood, the weight of the moment pressing down. The judge's eyes swept the courtroom, then settled on Abby. "The court has reviewed all evidence and testimonies presented. In the case of Abigail Brooks." His voice was deliberate, heavy with gravity. "The sentence is death by lethal injection." A hush fell over the room. Marco felt his chest tighten, his throat constrict. He sank back into the bench, trembling. The words hit him like a physical blow. He turned to look at Abby. Her gaze was steady, calm, almost unreadable, but Marco could see the flicker of emotion she didn't allow anyone else to witness, the fear, the sorrow, the betrayal. Unable to hold back, he rose, voice breaking. "Judge. Please. You don't understand, she's more than what you think. I love her. She's still Abby." The judge's eyes hardened, but the gavel struck again, silencing the plea. Marco's knees buckled, and he fell back into his seat, tears streaming freely. He had given his testimony, he had told the truth. And now, there was no undoing it. Abby's hand clenched slightly, a subtle tremor betraying the storm behind her calm exterior. Marco had loved her, truly. And she had let herself be vulnerable, opening her heart to him, and he had turned it into evidence against her. After the courtroom emptied, Marco approached her, tears still streaming, voice breaking. "Abby. I fell in love with you the moment I saw you. In the kitchen, the way you moved, the way you smiled. I've loved you since then. I can't lose you like this." Abby's voice was raw, a whisper that cut through the grief. "Love?" she spat, bitterness and pain mingling. "You betrayed me. While I bared myself to you, you handed me over." Marco shook his head violently. "I never betrayed my heart. I only spoke the truth, because I had to. But I love you, all of you, even the parts one don't understand." Abby's defenses faltered, her eyes moist as tears threatened to escape. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel, to soften. Marco knelt beside her, taking her hands in his, both of them trembling, crying quietly together. I can't change what I am," Abby admitted, voice trembling, guarded but vulnerable. "But Marco. You saw me. Truly saw me. Even now. I see you," Marco whispered, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Always." As the guards moved in to escort her back into custody, Abby held his gaze, one last unspoken promise, a memory of love, and the bond they had shared. Marco stepped back, sobbing quietly, as she was led away, every step a reminder of what he had lost, and what could never be reclaimed. Chapter 36. Shadows and Reflections. Marco sank into his favorite armchair at home, the apartment cloaked in silence. The television hummed softly, a forgotten program flickering in the background. His hands trembled as he buried his face in them, every memory of Abby, the first time he had seen her command the kitchen, the way she had laughed that one night, the quiet intimacy they had shared, colliding violently with the horror he had uncovered. Tears streamed freely down his face, unrestrained. "I love you. I love you," he whispered into the empty room. His heart ached in a way he had never known, a mix of love, guilt, and helplessness. He had wanted to save her, to protect her, to understand her, but he had also borne witness to a darkness he couldn't condone. Across town, in a stark, cold cell, Abby Brooks sat with her back against the wall, hands folded neatly in her lap. The fluorescent lights overhead did nothing to soften the edges of her world. She was a predator contained, a mind still sharp, still calculating, still aware. Yet, the memory of Marco's tearful gaze haunted her. She traced the lines of her cell with her eyes, imagining the possibilities, the escape, the careful dance of her mind that had always kept her in control. But for the first time in years, her heart felt exposed. Marco had seen her, not the persona, not the mask, but the real Abby Brooks. And even behind bars, the weight of that truth pressed upon her. Her lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile, tinged with melancholy. "He still loves me," she thought, the realization both a comfort and a torment. She knew she couldn't tell him everything, not yet, not ever. The darkness inside her couldn't risk his safety or his heart. And yet, the ache of wanting to be seen, truly understood, lingered. In the quiet, she allowed herself a brief flash of memory, the night they had made love, the warmth of his hands, the gentleness in his voice, the trust they had shared. It was forbidden, impossible, but it had been real. She clung to that fragment, a reminder that even in a world of her making, love had found a way. Meanwhile, Marco sat slumped on his couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of her face, every word she had said, every touch they had shared. He didn't understand how someone could be so dangerous and yet so utterly captivating. He felt torn between the law, morality, and the love that had rooted itself deep in his chest. Outside, the city slept, unaware of the storm that had passed through two lives, leaving scars invisible to everyone but them. Inside, both Marco and Abby faced different prisons, one of flesh, one of law, but each shared the same emptiness, the same longing, the same inescapable connection that had defined them from the very beginning. And somewhere in that shared, fractured space between guilt and love, both wondered, could anything ever bridge the gap between the person they had loved and the monster they had become? Chapter 37. Last goodbye. The courthouse steps were crowded, a sea of journalists, cameras, and murmuring spectators pressing in from every side. Abby Brooks, handcuffed and flanked by officers, walked steadily toward the awaiting van that would take her to her execution. Her usual composure was gone, tonight, the mask was slipping. From the crowd, Marco's eyes locked onto her immediately. Every step she took sent a jolt through him, a mix of horror, longing, and heartbreak. He had followed the trial as closely as possible, each day adding weight to the unbearable reality. Abby Brooks, the woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted, was about to die. As she neared the edge of the plaza, Abby's gaze caught Marco's. Something in his expression, tears streaking his face, chest heaving, hands clenched, stirred a raw, aching need in her. Against the officer's commands and her own fear, she broke into a run. "Marco," she cried, her voice breaking across the space between them. He froze, panic and hope warring in his eyes. She collided into him, arms wrapping around his torso despite the handcuffs. Her face buried into the side of his neck, and she sobbed, shaking uncontrollably. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she whispered, voice muffled against his shoulder. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I could never hurt you, Marco. I only fell in love with you. Marco's hands trembled as he held her, tears carving trails down his face. Abby. I love you too, he choked out, voice thick with grief. I always have. Her tears soaked his shoulder, her body racked with sobs, yet she clung to him with desperate intensity. Even in handcuffs, even in the shadow of death, she sought the comfort of his arms. I'm sorry, she repeated again and again, the words both apology and confession. I didn't mean for any of this. I never meant for any of this, Marco. Marco pressed his forehead to hers, trying to memorize the warmth of her face, the sound of her voice, the feel of her in his arms. Every instinct screamed to stay, to fight, to pull her away from the world, but it was too late. Officers cautiously began to pull Abby away, their grip firm but gentle, guiding her toward the van. Marco's hands hovered, unable to let go, trembling as the reality settled in. I'm sorry. Marco, I love you. I'm so sorry, she sobbed into his neck, her voice breaking with each word. Please. Don't hate me. Marco kissed the top of her head, tears spilling freely, a strangled sob escaping him. Never. Never. I could never hate you. I'll always love you, Abby. And then, gently but firmly, the officers led her away. Marco's outstretched hands reached for her, but the distance grew with every step. Her cries and his mingled, echoing through the plaza, a final, shattering connection before the inevitability of the sentence. Abby looked back one last time, eyes blazing with tears, love, and desperation. Marco's face mirrored hers, grief-stricken, hopeless, yet impossibly tender. In that instant, the world shrank to the two of them, suspended between what had been and what would never be. And in the crowd, every bystander witnessed a love forged in darkness, in secrecy, and in impossible choices, a love that even death could not sever from memory. Chapter 38, the final hour. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the prison grounds. Marco stood among the sparse crowd of witnesses, his chest tight, hands trembling at his sides. The weight of the trial, the confession, and their final embrace pressed down on him like a vice. Abby was brought forward, her handcuffs glinting under the stark lights. Her eyes, still wet from tears, sought Marco's once more. The officers guided her with precision, but she kept her gaze locked on him, refusing to look away. Marco, she whispered as she was led to the execution chamber, her voice barely audible over the low hum of the fluorescent lights. He swallowed hard, feeling as if his heart had been ripped out. Abby. I'm here, he called back, voice cracking. I love you. A faint, sad smile touched her lips, the softness of a momentary reprieve in the storm of tragedy. I love you too, she whispered, almost a prayer. Inside the chamber, Abby was secured, her eyes scanning the room one last time. She exhaled sharply, the chains biting at her wrists, yet her gaze remained defiant. Marco's face appeared in her mind, every memory of their closeness flashing vividly, the first touch, the stolen kisses, the quiet nights, the moments of trust. The executioner's voice broke the silence, procedural, formal. Final words. Abby's lips quivered, and she found Marco's eyes one last time through the glass. I'm sorry for everything. And I love you, she breathed, voice breaking with raw emotion. Tears streamed freely down her face, mixing pain, regret, and the tenderness she had never allowed herself to fully show. Marco pressed his hands against the glass, unwilling to let go. I love you too. I'll always love you, Abby, he cried, body shaking, tears flowing unchecked. The signal was given. The room fell into stillness except for the soft mechanical hum. Abby's final gaze lingered on Marco's face, memorizing it, holding it close to her heart, a tether to the only light she had ever let into her life. And then it happened. Marco sank to his knees as the chamber fell silent. His chest heaved, sobs racking him uncontrollably. The weight of loss, of love, of betrayal, pressed down until every rational thought faded into a blur of grief. He had known the truth, loved her still, but the world had demanded justice, and it had taken the woman he loved most. He pressed his forehead to the glass, whispering into the void, hoping somehow she could hear him, "I'm so sorry, Abby. I'm so sorry." The crowd dispersed slowly, leaving Marco alone with the echo of his heartbreak and the memory of a love that had burned brighter than it should have, only to be snuffed out by fate and consequence. Abby Brooks, the brilliant, dangerous, and unforgettable woman, was gone, but in Marco's mind and heart, she would remain, vivid and alive, as the love of his life, the one he could never save, yet could never forget. Chapter 39. The weight of guilt. The apartment was silent, the city lights outside casting cold, fractured shadows across the walls. Marco sat slumped on the edge of his bed, the photograph of Abby in his hands trembling violently. Her face smiled back at him, untainted by the horrors that had followed, and the memory of her final embrace, the warmth, the whispered apologies, the tearful confession of love, pierced him like a blade. I'm sorry, Abby. I should have stopped this. I should have protected you," he whispered, his voice breaking as tears carved deep lines down his face. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, a ghost that made his chest tighten unbearably. The weight of guilt was suffocating. He couldn't forgive himself for sending the police to her door, couldn't reconcile the love that had consumed him with the horror of her crimes. Every heartbeat throbbed with agony, every breath reminded him she was gone, and he had been powerless to save her from herself, or from the world. He rose unsteadily, hands gripping the edges of the dresser, eyes darting across the room as if she might appear at any moment. The apartment, once filled with laughter, warmth, and hope, now felt hollow, cold, and accusatory. I can't live without you," he choked out, clutching the photograph to his chest as sobs racked his body. The tears soaked the paper, smudging her face, blurring the image of the woman he loved more than life itself. He moved toward the corner of the room, where the old rope from a forgotten project lay, a cruel, ironic echo of the finality that had claimed Abby. Hands shaking, he tied it carefully, methodically, his mind numb with grief. This is the only way I can be with you again," he whispered to the empty apartment, to the memory of her eyes, her soft laugh, the warmth of her hand in his. His legs trembled as he secured the rope, the photograph pressed against his chest one last time. A shudder ran through him. He swallowed, eyes glazing over, vision narrowing to the single truth he could no longer ignore. The world would go on. But for Marco, there was only her. Only the unbearable loss. Only the guilt that would never relent. With a final, ragged breath, he let go. The sobs cut deep, echoing in the empty apartment, as his body dropped into darkness. Silence followed, broken only by the distant hum of the city. Outside, life continued, unaware of the tragedy that had consumed the man who had loved Abby Brooks more than himself. Epilogue. The city moved on, indifferent to the tragedies that had unfolded behind closed doors. News reports replayed Abby Brooks' crimes in endless loops, the public fascinated, horrified, and appalled. Her name became a symbol, a chilling reminder of charm turned lethal, of beauty hiding deadly intent. At the precinct, Detective Baldwin closed the final case files, his expression a mixture of relief and unease. Abby had been caught, justice formally served, yet the image of Marco's tear-streaked face haunted him. The detective knew that law could hold the guilty accountable, but it could not erase the collateral heartbreak left behind. Anthony Brooks lived with a hollow regret, the memory of his daughter's rage and the words she had spat at him echoing in his mind. He wandered through his opulent home, wondering if anything could ever cleanse the stains of absence, neglect, and betrayal. The man who had lost his daughter to vengeance now felt the weight of every choice, every selfish act. For those who knew Marco D'Angelo, whispers spread. The celebrated chef, once known for his precision, passion, and charisma, had vanished quietly from the culinary scene. Few knew the truth, that he had carried Abi in his heart until the very end, that love and guilt had consumed him entirely. In the solitude of his apartment, he had found no escape from the memory of her. And yet, somewhere in the shadows of grief and silence, a strange intimacy lingered. For a brief moment in history, two lives, entwined by love, obsession, and tragedy, had collided. Abi Brooks, brilliant, terrifying, and tragically human, and Marco D'Angelo, devoted, broken, and irreversibly in love. Their story would be remembered not only for horror but for the depth of connection that had defied reason, law, and mortality itself. The city lights glimmered coldly outside, unaware of the ghosts walking silently among the living. In the end, all that remained were echoes, of love, of guilt, of choices that could not be undone. Abi's legacy lingered like a shadow, long after her handcuffs had clinked, long after Marco's tears had fallen, and long after the world had moved on. Some stories, it seemed, never truly ended, they haunted the spaces between memory and time.